My name is Claire Carter, Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Navy, in charge of security at Headquarters Command in Norfolk, Virginia. And the day I saw my father's signature in the Command Logbook, everything I believed about loyalty, honor, and duty cracked wide open. It was an ordinary morning, or at least it was supposed to be. The kind of day when the smell of coffee drifted through the hallway outside the command suite, when secretaries exchanged quiet greetings, and the flag outside caught the first gold of the rising sun. I'd gone through the security checks 1,000 times: badge scan, morning briefing, personnel updates, inspection rounds. Routine, familiar, safe. Until that one small detail. The visitor log said retired General Marcus Hayden would be coming in to sign the Command Logbook, a simple ceremonial tradition we did for senior officers who once served at the base. Nothing classified, nothing unusual, just a photo, a handshake, a signature, a quiet word of thanks for their years of service. I remember reading his name, pausing, feeling something faint but sharp inside me. Hayden. It wasn't an uncommon name, but it tugged at a thread buried deep in my memory, one connected to my father. I brushed it off, told myself it was just coincidence, and went back to checking the entry schedule. By 0900 hours, the general's car pulled into the lot, a black sedan, government tags, nothing flashy. He stepped out with the posture of a man who had commanded rooms his entire life. White hair, polished shoes, a faint limp. Age hadn't softened him, it had distilled him. He nodded as I saluted, his eyes steady but tired. "Lieutenant Colonel Carter," he said, voice like gravel wrapped in formality. "Pleasure." "Welcome back to command, sir," I replied. "The logbook's ready inside." We entered the Hall of Honor together. The space was quiet, lined with framed portraits and old campaign flags. At the center, a simple oak table, a fountain pen, and that old blue leather logbook. I'd always loved it, pages thick as history itself, each signature a chapter of service, each name a memory of sacrifice. The general adjusted his glasses, took the pen, and began to sign. His hand moved slow but steady, practiced. And then something inside me jolted. My eyes caught the curve of a letter, the slant of a line. My breath caught before I could stop it. That handwriting. It couldn't be. My father's handwriting was distinct, clean, deliberate, with a slight upward tilt on every R like optimism built into ink. I hadn't seen it since 1991, the year he went missing in action. But that day on that page, the shape of the signature hit me like a pulse of lightning. I froze. The hallway seemed to fall silent. "Sir," my voice came out smaller than I intended, "that's my father's signature." The pen stopped mid-air. The general's hand trembled. For a long, unbearable moment, he didn't look at me. Then he reached for the glass of water beside him, his fingers slipping just enough that it tipped and shattered against the floor. He didn't even flinch at the sound. Instead, he turned, eyes wide, pale as ash. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said quietly. The air between us thickened. I could hear the slow drip of water from the broken glass, the hum of the overhead lights. "What do you mean?" I asked, forcing my voice steady. "Sir, that's my father's name, Commander Daniel Carter." The general blinked hard, pressing his thumb against the bridge of his nose like a man fighting back something heavy. "Yes," he said finally, "I know who he was." Was I echoed the word scraping out of me? "You mean is. He's still listed as MIA. He exhaled through his teeth, not answering. Then, in a voice too soft for anyone else to hear, he whispered, "Some things are left that way for a reason." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. 20 years of discipline couldn't stop the flood rising in my chest, the anger, the confusion, the ache of a daughter who'd waited half her life for the truth. "I think I deserve to know why his signature is in our current logbook, sir," I said. My voice was trembling, but the words came sharp. The general stared at me, not as a superior officer, but as a man cornered by his own conscience. For a second, I thought he might order me to drop it. Instead, he turned away, shoulders heavy. "Your father was a good man," he murmured. "Better than most. But you'd do well to leave this alone." And then he walked out, slow, deliberate steps, echoing down the corridor, each one heavier than the last. I stood there long after he was gone, staring at the ink still drying on the page. The same handwriting that once signed my report cards, my birthday letters, my commission certificate, now trapped inside a book no one was supposed to question. Outside, the base carried on as if nothing had changed. But something inside me had shifted forever. That night, long after everyone had left, I returned to the Hall of Honor alone. The janitor lights flickered faintly across the portraits. I opened the logbook again, tracing my father's name with my fingertip. Daniel Carter, it read, same steady strokes, same upward tilt on the R, and next to it, a date that didn't make sense. Signed April 15th, 2022. He'd been declared missing since 1991. For a moment, my breath turned shallow. Then the training took over, calm, the pulse control, the breath analyzed the data. But no part of logic could explain that. Was it a forgery? Some kind of prank? Or had I just uncovered something far bigger, a truth buried beneath decades of silence? All I knew was that someone had written that name for a reason, and I intended to find out who and why. I closed the book carefully, feeling the weight of history in my hands. As I turned to leave, the reflection of the old flag on the wall caught my eye, the same one my father had saluted the day he left for his final mission. Somewhere deep inside, a memory whispered back, "Never confuse silence with peace. Claire, sometimes silence hides the fight worth finishing." That night, I didn't sleep. That signature, my father's ghost written in ink, had just called me back to duty. The next morning, the base felt different, quieter, though nothing on paper had changed. Same officers in the corridor, same hum of fluorescent lights, same aroma of burned coffee from the mess. But underneath it all, I felt that strange current, like a low vibration under the floorboards. Once you notice it, you can't unhear it. I spent the first half of the day pretending to work. My mind wasn't on security logs or personnel reports. It was on a page of blue leather sitting 2 floors below me, ink still drying beside a date that shouldn't exist. At 1100 hours, I checked the visitor clearance file. General Marcus Hayden's appointment had been entered manually by the administrative office, no digital confirmation, no timestamp of entry. That alone was odd. Retired officers usually came through public affairs, not through internal scheduling. Someone wanted this visit to look routine. I typed his name into the personnel archive. Marcus J. Hayden, retired 2002. Former Commander, Naval Intelligence Division, North Atlantic Command. My stomach turned. Naval Intelligence. That was my father's branch. I printed his record, slid it under my arm, and told my aide I was heading out for an external meeting. In truth, I was going to the old records room, a windowless bunker that smelled of dust and machine oil where forgotten paperwork went to die. The clerk on duty looked up from his crossword puzzle. "Colonel Carter," he said. "Don't see you down here often." "I'm following up on an entry in the Command Logbook," I said. "I need everything we've got on retired General Hayden's previous assignments." He frowned, then pulled open a steel cabinet. "Most of this stuff's half redacted. You sure you want to dive into that swamp?" "I'm already knee-deep," I said. He gave me a small smile, handed me a cardboard box stamped "Classified, Declass Pending 2041. Inside were yellowing folders, field memos, and one thin file marked Carter D. My breath caught. I opened it carefully. The pages were brittle edges, curled. The last entry was dated August 14, 1991. Subject transferred to Intelligence Review pending investigation. Status MIA. Under review. No closure notice, no family correspondence, nothing. Just silence. My father had disappeared while under review by Naval Intelligence General Hayden's department. I sat there a long while, tracing the ink with my thumb, trying to picture my father the last time I'd seen him. I was 9. He'd knelt by the porch swing, adjusting my small navy blue jacket he'd bought at the base store. "Always stand tall, Claire Bear," he'd said, brushing my hair from my eyes, "even when the world bends." Then he'd walked away and never came home. By late afternoon, I knew I couldn't sit with ghosts any longer. If I wanted answers, I'd have to get them from the only man still breathing who knew the story. I found the general's number in the directory of retired officers. His assistant answered with a brisk tone. "General Hayden's office." "This is Lieutenant Colonel Carter, Headquarters Command," I said. "I'd like to request a private meeting." Pause. "Then is this about yesterday?" "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. "The general's not well, ma'am. But if you insist, he can see you at his residence at 1900 hours. Bring no one else." The line went dead. That evening I drove out toward Chesapeake, the highway fading into long stretches of pine and amber sky. His house stood alone on a bluff overlooking the bay, a modest colonial neat but lonely. The porch light was already on. He opened the door himself wearing a gray sweater instead of a uniform, his posture slightly bent. "Colonel Carter," he said, "I thought you might call." "Sir," I replied, "you left me with questions." He motioned me inside. The living room smelled faintly of bourbon and old paper. On the mantel were framed photographs, medals, ships, faces of men in uniforms from different decades. One photo stopped me cold, my father smiling beside a younger Marcus Hayden. "Sit," the general said quietly. "Before you start understand this, I don't owe you explanations. What I owe is a promise I made long ago." "With respect, sir, I said that promise cost my family 30 years of silence." He looked down at his hands, the veins like cords under pale skin. "Your father was the finest officer I ever commanded. He had something most of us lost: conscience. He saw things he shouldn't have, things that made powerful men nervous." "What things?" I asked. "Procurement contracts, a private supplier routing faulty equipment overseas. Men died because of it. He tried to expose it, but there were names above him that wanted it buried. I was ordered to contain him. Instead, I gave him time to disappear." I felt my throat close. Disappear. He didn't die, Claire. He left. New identity, quiet life, somewhere far from here. It was the only way to keep him safe and to keep the Navy from tearing itself apart. I shook my head. "That doesn't make sense. His MIA file." "Filed by me," he said, "to protect him, and you." "Then why sign the logbook?" I demanded. "Why now?" His eyes softened, old and weary. "Because time's running out. He asked me to leave proof so when you were ready you'd find it." I sat there stunned, the words echoing in my head like sonar pings. My father alive somewhere out there. The general rose, slowly walked to a wooden chest near the window, and pulled out an envelope sealed with navy wax. "He told me to give this to you when I couldn't hide it any longer." I took it, my fingers trembling. The envelope was heavy, the handwriting on the front unmistakable: for Claire. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then the general's voice cracked. "I carried my share of sins, Colonel. Some for duty, some for survival. But this one was for love." Outside, the wind rustled through the bay trees. I wanted to speak, but all I could do was nod. When I left his house, the envelope sat in the passenger seat, glowing in the dashboard light like a living thing. I didn't open it right away. For 30 years, I'd wanted the truth. Now I wasn't sure I could bear it. I drove back toward the base, the road empty, the night air cool and heavy. The glass that had shattered in his hand that morning felt like a mirror, 2 lives breaking open at once. I didn't open the envelope that night. It sat on my kitchen table under the dim yellow light next to an untouched cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The wax seal with the Navy crest stared back at me like an eye unblinking patient, almost daring me to break it. I told myself I'd wait until morning. But morning came and the envelope was still there, and so was the fear. It's strange you can face live ammunition, lead a security detail during high-alert drills, handle threats with steady hands, but when it comes to one letter from your own father, your knees go weak. By 0700, I decided I couldn't read it alone. I drove to my mother's house, a small 1-story place outside Virginia Beach. The paint was faded, but she still kept the porch immaculate: flagpole wind chimes, rose bushes that bloomed even in bad seasons. When she saw me, she smiled, then frowned. "Claire, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," I said softly, setting the envelope on the counter. She stared at the wax seal. Her hand went to her mouth. "Where did you get that?" "From General Hayden." Her face drained of color. "He's still alive." I nodded. He said Dad is too. For a moment she just stared, eyes glassy. Then she sank into a chair like the strength had left her bones. "Claire, if this is some cruel mistake..." "It's his handwriting, Mom. It's real." Her hands trembled as she touched the envelope. He promised he'd never contact us again. He said it was safer that way. I sat across from her. Safer from what? She looked down. From people who called themselves patriots but sold their souls for contracts and favors. From men who'd rather kill a good officer than admit they were wrong. My throat went dry, you knew. I knew parts, she said quietly. Your father told me enough to understand he'd made enemies in high places. When he disappeared, I got a visit from a man in uniform, not Hayden, someone else who said if I wanted you safe, I should never ask questions. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were 9, and you already looked like him, stubborn and fearless. I thought the Navy would give you purpose, not reopen his wound. I looked at her, the woman who'd held our world together, with silence. And suddenly I wasn't angry. I just felt the weight of 3 decades pressing down on both of us. Finally, she said, "Open it." I broke the seal carefully. Inside were 3 pages handwritten, dated 6 months earlier. The ink had smudged in spots as if written in haste or with tears nearby. Claire. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't stay hidden forever. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because love was the only way to protect you from what was coming. I refused to approve a shipment weapons meant for allies, but rigged with faulty guidance. Hayden helped me fake my death before the men behind it could silence me. He took the disgrace so I could disappear. He's carried that burden for 30 years. Don't hate him, Claire. He saved my life and yours. If you want to find me, look not in Washington but in Wilmington. There's a boat named Honor Tide. I'll be waiting until the sea takes me. I read it twice before I could breathe again. My mother was crying softly. Wilmington, she whispered. That's where we honeymooned. I folded the letter gently. Then that's where I'm going. She grabbed my hand. Claire, wait. After all these years, what if he's gone? Then I'll stand where he last stood, I said. I've waited long enough for ghosts. By afternoon, I was on the highway heading south. The radio played old country songs my dad used to hum along to. The wind through the window carried salt from the Atlantic. Every mile felt like shedding a uniform made of old silence. When I reached Wilmington, the marina looked like something out of time, wooden docks, peeling paint gulls screaming overhead. Fishermen were hauling in nets, tourists snapping photos near the lighthouse. I walked past them all, scanning the boats, until one name stopped me cold: Honor Tide. The vessel was small, modest, but clean. Someone cared for it. I climbed aboard slowly, heart hammering, and called out, "Hello!" A man's voice answered from the cabin, rough, older, but still strong. "Can I help you?" He stepped out, sunburned skin, gray beard, eyes sharp and impossibly familiar. My knees nearly gave out. "Dad." He froze. For a second, neither of us breathed. Then he said, Claire, like saying my name pulled 30 years of air back into his lungs. I didn't run to him right away. I just stood there, staring, trying to merge the ghost in my memories with the man before me. Finally, I stepped closer. "You're alive." He nodded, eyes wet. Not proud of how, but yes. "I read your letter." "Then you know everything." "Enough," I said. "Enough to hate what they did. But I don't know why you let us believe you were dead." He sighed, rubbing his face. "Because the Navy wasn't the same Navy anymore. I had evidence, things that would have burned good men along with the guilty. I thought disappearing would stop the cycle. I was wrong. The anger I thought I'd bring with me dissolved into something heavier. You could have trusted me," I said quietly. "I did," he replied. "That's why I left. I knew you'd carry the name Carter with honor even when they tried to stain it." The marina wind blew between us, salty and warm. He looked smaller than I remembered, but his eyes still had that calm steadiness, the same eyes that taught me to aim, to salute, to tell truth even when it hurt. "I wanted to come home so many times," he said. "Hayden begged me not to. He said you had a life, a career, that digging up the past would only hurt you." "He was wrong," I said softly. The silence hurt more. He nodded slowly, reached into the cabin, and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was his old Navy insignia, polished, carefully kept. "This belonged to my father," he said, "and to his before him. It's yours now." I held it in my palms, cool, heavy, familiar. "Dad," I said, voice breaking, "I need to make this right. People should know the truth." He looked out toward the open water. "Truth doesn't always save reputations, Claire. Sometimes it saves souls." I didn't answer, but in my heart I knew this wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was about restoring something bigger, faith in what honor still means. That night I stayed on the boat. We talked until dawn about Mom, about the years he'd missed, about forgiveness that neither of us had words for. and when the sun rose over the bay, I realized the story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the cabin blinds and painted thin golden lines across the table where my father sat, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. For a moment, it felt almost normal, a father and daughter sharing breakfast by the water. Then the silence between us reminded me that 3 decades stood between our words. He looked older, of course, hair gone gray, skin weathered by salt and sun. But there was still that familiar sharpness in his eyes, that steady focus that used to scare lieutenants half his age. "Did Mom know you were alive?" I asked. He hesitated. "Hayden told her enough to keep you both safe. She was stronger than we gave her credit for." I nodded slowly. "She kept your picture on the piano, dusted it every Sunday, said it reminded her that silence isn't the same as forgetting." He smiled faintly. "That sounds like her." I leaned forward. "You said in your letter you refused to sign a deal. The one that killed soldiers. What really happened?" He took a deep breath. "It started as a routine inspection. A contractor named Vexton Systems, they were supplying navigation modules to overseas partners. I found discrepancies. Internal testing data had been falsified. A batch of equipment was defective, dangerously so. When I raised the issue, I was told to stand down." His voice grew quieter. A week later, the report vanished. 2 men from defense procurement visited me. They hinted that my career would end if I didn't cooperate. Hayden was my commanding officer then. He warned me they'd make me disappear if I kept digging. He wasn't wrong. I felt my chest tighten. "So they framed you?" "They didn't need to. They just let time bury me." Hayden forged an internal memo declaring me under investigation and helped me vanish before they could act. He should have retired a hero. Instead, he carried the guilt of a ghost. "And Vexton?" I asked. "Thriving," he said bitterly. "New name, new contracts, new politicians backing them. Different faces, same game." I looked out the porthole at the calm marina. "So what now? Do we expose them?" He shook his head. "We're not in a courtroom, Claire. We're in the real world. And in the real world, truth without timing is suicide." His words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. Still, the soldier in me bristled. If we don't tell it, they win. He studied me for a long moment. "You sound like me at your age, but remember, justice isn't vengeance. It's doing the right thing even when it costs you." I looked down at the insignia box sitting between us. "Then maybe it's time someone paid that cost." He smiled sadly. "That someone shouldn't be you." We sat in silence for a while. Outside, fishermen shouted to each other across the docks and gulls circled over the masts. The world carried on oblivious to our small storm. By afternoon, I convinced him to let me take a copy of his old service records. He had a folder hidden under the bunk, brittle papers, old photographs, receipts, handwritten notes, even one faded cassette labeled Field Debrief, 1991. "I don't know if any of this still matters," he said. "It matters to me," I replied. I scanned the documents at a small print shop near the marina. When I came back, he was sitting on deck, eyes on the horizon. "You know," he said, "there's something poetic about this. I spent my life serving a system that tried to erase me. And now my own daughter, that same system's lieutenant colonel, is here to bring me back." "It's not the system, Dad," I said softly. "It's the people inside it. Some break it, some rebuild it." He nodded, then looked past me, expression unreadable. "Do you trust Hayden?" I hesitated. "I don't know." He looked haunted, like a man who'd been carrying a secret too long. "That's exactly why he's dangerous," Dad murmured. "Guilt makes men unpredictable." That night after dinner, I walked along the pier while he stayed behind cleaning the deck. The wind had picked up, tugging at the loose ends of my hair. A small group of veterans sat near the lighthouse, swapping stories, their laughter carrying across the water. One of them waved at me, an older Marine in a faded cap. "Evenin', ma'am," he said. I nodded. "Evening. Boat named Honor Tide yours?" "My father's," I said. He grinned. "Fine man, whoever he is. Always fixes our engine problems without taking a dime. You're his girl." I smiled faintly. "Yeah, I guess I am." As I walked back, something in that exchange stayed with me, the way the Marine said, "fine man." For all the pain, all the hiding, my father hadn't turned bitter. He'd lived quietly, helping others, carrying his burden with humility. Inside the cabin, he was already asleep, the letter from Hayden's envelope folded neatly beside him. I watched him for a moment, the steady rise and fall of his chest, and felt something unclench inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry, I was proud. The next day, I made the drive back to Norfolk. The command building rose from the shoreline like a wall of glass and steel, clean, unfeeling. I parked by the south entrance, badge clipped, uniform pressed. I walked straight to the archive office. "Colonel Carter," the clerk said, startled. "You're back early." "I need access to procurement records from 1991 to 1993, I said. He frowned. "Those are restricted." "Not for long," I replied, sliding a signed clearance form across the desk, Hayden's signature at the bottom. His eyes widened. "You have his approval." Apparently, he still believes in doing the right thing. I spent the next 3 hours buried in documents. Most files were mundane, but one folder marked Vexton Systems. Internal memos caught my eye. Attached to a quarterly report was a receipt for replacement units dated August 12, 1991, 2 days before my father disappeared. The signature of approval, Hayden's. My pulse quickened. Had he forged my father's name before? Was the logbook signature a warning or a confession? By the time the sun dipped below the base towers, I knew I had to see the general again, not as a subordinate, but as the daughter of the man whose ghost still haunted his conscience. That night I drove to Chesapeake once more. His house was dark except for one light in the study. I rang the bell. He opened the door slowly, expression weary. "I wondered when you'd come." I held up the document. "You told me you saved him. But this, your signature, the missing report's what really happened, sir." He looked at me, eyes hollow. "I did what I had to do to keep him alive." "Then why does it still look like a cover-up?" I asked. "Because it was he," whispered, "just not the one you think." He motioned me inside, shutting the door behind us with a slow, tired click. The house smelled faintly of cedar and bourbon. The same photograph I'd seen before, my father and him standing shoulder to shoulder in dress whites, now sat face down on the mantel. General Hayden moved to the table, his movements heavy like a man dragging the past with every step. He poured himself a glass of water instead of whiskey this time, his hand shaking slightly as he spoke. "Sit, Colonel," he said. "You deserve the truth, but it won't feel good once you have it." "I've lived 30 years without it," I replied. "I'll take the pain." He gave a hollow chuckle. "That's exactly what your father said." He sat down, took a breath, and began. "Back in 1991, your father and I were part of an intelligence review team investigating Vexton Systems. What started as a small audit turned into a hornet's nest. The company had friends, senators, contractors, even a few inside the Navy itself. The moment we started asking questions, doors began to close. Then men started dying in accidents that weren't accidents." He paused, eyes fixed somewhere far away. "Daniel found proof that someone inside the Pentagon was approving shipments that didn't exist. Money was being funneled into offshore accounts. Billions. He confronted them. I told him to be careful. He said, 'Honor doesn't whisper, Marcus.'" The words hung in the air like smoke. "When the threats came," Hayden continued, "I was ordered to neutralize the problem. I refused, so they gave the order to someone else. That's when I knew I had to make him disappear. We staged his death, a helicopter incident during a classified transport. I signed the falsified report. It broke every rule I'd ever sworn to uphold, but it saved his life." I leaned forward, gripping the table edge. "So you were protecting him, and the Navy?" He nodded slowly. "Both. The truth would have burned the institution down. He agreed to vanish." I took the heat, and the corruption continued under new names. I shook my head, so the rot stayed. "It always does," he said quietly. "But the men behind it are older now, some gone, some still pretending to serve the country they sold." "Why tell me now?" I asked. He looked at me, then really looked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because they're watching again. Someone reopened the Vexton files last week. That signature in the logbook. That wasn't just nostalgia, Claire. It was a warning. Someone inside command is digging where they shouldn't." My heart sank. "You think they'll come after him again?" "I think they'll come after you." The words landed like gunfire. He slid a small flash drive across the table. This holds everything I have left: emails, ledgers, names. I've hidden copies, but this is the master record. Keep it safe. If they find out you've spoken to me, deny everything." "I'm not going to hide, sir," I said. "I've spent my whole life defending rules written by men who break them. That ends now." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "You sound just like him." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly across the bay. The rain started tapping on the windows, steady, rhythmic. Hayden slowly went to the shelf and took down the photograph of him and my father. He wiped the dust away. "We were young. Believed we could change the world." "What changed?" I asked. "Time," he said simply, "and fear." He turned toward me, his eyes glinting under the lamplight. "Promise me one thing, Colonel. If you go digging, you finish what he started. Don't half die for it like I did." I took the drive. "I'll finish it." As I turned to leave, he said quietly, "If you need to reach your father, don't call. Use the name Honor Tide in a secure transmission. He'll know it's you." I nodded, heart pounding. Back in my car, I sat in the dark for a long time, the rain streaking down the windshield like slow tears. The flash drive felt heavy in my pocket, heavier than any weapon I'd ever carried. I thought about my father's face when I found him, the way he'd smiled through regret. I thought about my mother's quiet endurance. And I thought about all the young recruits who saluted me each morning, believing the system I now knew was cracked beneath the surface. By the time I reached the base, it was after midnight. The gates were closed. The guards saluted as I passed. I went straight to my office, locked the door, and plugged the drive into my encrypted terminal. The screen filled with files, scanned contracts, bank transfers, names of defense officials. I recognized senators I'd briefed, companies I'd toured. It was all there. One file stood out: Project Sealance, 1991. It included a memo from Vexton to a government liaison authorizing a controlled demonstration of modified navigation systems. The signature at the bottom wasn't Hayden's. It was someone else's: Rear Admiral William D. Carver, current head of procurement, still active duty. The realization hit me like a blow. The corruption hadn't died with the Cold War, it had just changed uniforms. I printed the memo, locked it in my safe, and stared at the wall for a long time. There were two paths ahead: expose them and destroy careers, maybe lives, or keep quiet and let history bury the truth again. But the word honor in that project name, and the one on my father's boat, left no doubt which path I'd take. The next morning I requested an internal audit authorization under my security clearance. The clerk blinked in confusion. "Ma'am, you're requesting a review of procurement accounts from the early 90s. "That's correct." He hesitated. "Is this official business?" I met his eyes. It's about time it became official. He stamped the request, unsure whether he was signing off on paperwork or history. That night I called my father using an encrypted Navy line. When he answered, his voice was cautious. "Honor Tide." "It's me," I said. "Dad, I found something. It's still happening." Silence. Then a sigh. "Then you'd better be careful, Claire. The men behind it won't go quietly this time." "I don't plan to be quiet either," I said. There was pride in his voice when he answered. "Then finish it. But remember what I told you: don't let revenge steal your honor." "I won't," I promised. "This isn't revenge, it's restoration." When I hung up, I looked at the dark window, my reflection faint over the city lights. For the first time in my career, I understood what my rank really meant. It wasn't authority, it was responsibility. And tomorrow I intended to use it. I didn't kick the door in. I opened it with procedure. The audit request I'd filed quietly went through, stamped by a clerk who didn't yet understand he'd just set a fuse. I scheduled an ethics and heritage event in the Hall of Honor under my purview, part training, part recognition. Public affairs cleared a small press pool. Invitations went to veterans, a local Gold Star Mothers chapter, and the newest class of recruits. I added one more name by hand: retired General Marcus J. Hayden. Before the ceremony, I asked legal to review a packet labeled for the Inspector General. The packet contained the sanitized backbone of what I'd found: no classified attachments, no sources that would endanger ongoing operations. The flash drive stayed locked in my safe. Names I couldn't substantiate didn't appear. I wasn't there to blow up everything. I was there to put the truth where it belonged. At 1600 hours, the Hall of Honor filled slowly, white-haired veterans, straightening their jackets, young sailors whispering in the back, a couple of reporters scribbling into notebooks because we'd asked them to leave their cameras at the door. On the wall, the old campaign flags hung like steady witnesses. At the center sat the oak table. The logbook waited. I stood at the podium, palms flat on the wood, feeling the weight of everyone who'd stood in that spot before me. "Good afternoon," I began. "Today's event is about 2 words we wear on our sleeves and sometimes forget in our bones: honor and truth. We're here to remember what they look like when they stand together." The room settled. The recruits in the last row stopped fidgeting. I introduced the stated purpose, recognizing exemplary service and refreshing our ethical commitments. Then I shifted. We're also here to restore a citation that was never delivered. It belongs to Commander Daniel Carter, Navy Intelligence, declared missing in action in 1991. A murmur moved across the room like a tide. Somewhere near the center, a veteran cleared his throat. I read the text I'd reconstructed from my father's notes and the audit's verified findings. No accusations, no politics, just the facts of a refusal, a man who would not sign off on defective systems that could cost lives, a man who accepted personal loss rather than betray the oath he took. I described courage as a quiet decision repeated daily, not a medal ceremony with trumpets. The doors opened softly at the back. General Hayden entered in a dark suit, leaning on a cane. He didn't try to sit. He stood in the aisle as if he owed the room something. Maybe he did. I kept reading. When I finished, I laid the citation on the oak table beside the logbook. For integrity under pressure, I said, "For choosing duty to conscience over duty to convenience, we affirm and restore the honor of Commander Daniel Carter." Applause started hesitantly, then gathered courage. I let the sound wash over me, steadying my breath. Then I did something I hadn't planned. "There's someone else here who carried a piece of this weight," I said. "A man who made choices that violated rules, but preserved a life." We live with the reality that in war and in peace, we are asked to choose between imperfect options. Today we acknowledge not only what was done, but why. I turned toward the aisle. "General Hayden, sir, would you join us?" He limped to the front. The recruits straightened as if a current ran through them. He stopped at the table, resting one hand on the wood as if asking permission from the ghosts embedded in it. He looked at the logbook, then at me, then at the recruits. "I failed many things," he said, voice rough, "but I would not fail the truth twice." He took the pen. His hand shook, and he signed his name under my father's restored citation, not as endorsement, not as absolution, but as witness. The door at the side opened again. 2 men in suits entered. Defense procurement observers announced on the day's schedule as if this were routine. One wore a tight smile, the other held a folder. I recognized the name tag, Rear Admiral William D. Carver. He stepped forward. "Colonel Carter," he said, his voice too smooth, "you've arranged a touching ceremony, but you're trespassing close to defamation." I kept my hand steady on the podium. "No names were mentioned, Admiral." Yet he replied. I motioned to legal. Our counsel, a calm woman who'd seen more storms than her age suggested, handed him a single-page statement acknowledgement of verified declassified facts, a notation that an IG review was opening, a reminder that any interference with a lawful audit would be reported. Carver read it, expression twisting just enough to betray panic. "You're playing with fire, Colonel." "So were the men who shipped defective systems," I said, "only they lit the match under other people's suns." The room went so quiet I could hear the clock in the hallway. The Gold Star mother in the second row stared at Carver with an expression I'll never forget, grief sharpened into clarity. He turned on his heel. The suits left without another word. No arrests, no headlines, just a door closing behind a man who suddenly looked very small. I exhaled slowly, then faced the room. "We are not here to topple towers," I said. "We are here to straighten beams." A pause. Then I spoke the words I'd practiced and still barely managed to say without breaking. "There is one more guest who should be present today, but cannot be for reasons of security. He lives quietly. He has given more to this country than most of us will ever know. He asked me to tell you one thing. Honor isn't about being right. It's about staying true when it costs you." I reached for the logbook. The blue leather felt warm under the lights. I turned it toward the recruits. In this book are names of men and women who stood their ground. I'm asking you to add yours today, tomorrow, and every day you wear the uniform by how you act when nobody's watching." A young sailor in the back raised his hand, voice unsteady. "Ma'am, does honor mean forgiving?" I swallowed. Sometimes, especially when the truth finally stands up. I looked at Hayden. He looked at me. I lifted my hand in salute, not as subordinate to superior, but as soldier to soldier. He returned it with tears in his eyes. The room rose with us veterans, recruits, the mother in the second row. One wave of hands, one steady gesture that said, "We still believe." When the ceremony ended, people lingered. The reporters asked soft questions about heritage and training. Legal collected statements for the IG. The recruits lined up to touch the logbook as if it were a living thing. Hayden waited until the hall emptied. "Your father would have been proud," he said. "I think he'd say the same to you," I answered. He shook his head. "I don't deserve that." "Maybe not then," I said, "but maybe today." He nodded once, a man accepting a sentence commuted, not erased. He rested his palm on the blue leather and whispered something I didn't catch. A prayer, or a goodbye. That night I carried a certified copy of the citation to my mother's house. We sat at the kitchen table under the same dim light that had stared at my fear. She pressed her fingertips to the paper like it might blow away. "He'll sleep better," she said. "So will I replied. Before midnight, I drove alone to the waterfront. The wind came off the water cold and clean. I pulled out my phone and opened the secure line. "Honor tied," I said. "It's done." My father's voice came through, thin but steady. I heard. "They stood for you today," I said, "and for what you stood for." He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "Make sure they keep standing when it's not popular." "I will," I said. "Tomorrow we begin the audit in full." "Do it the right way," he said. "No shortcuts, no trophies, just truth." The line clicked off. I stood there with the phone cooling in my hand, the dark water moving like a giant, patient heart. Somewhere out there, a small boat named Honor Tide rose and fell with the same rhythm. I drove home and slept for the first time in days. Not because the fight was over, but because the starting line was finally behind me. 2 days after the ceremony, the base seemed strangely peaceful. The news hadn't hit headlines yet. The reporters had written soft pieces about integrity in uniform and honoring forgotten heroes, nothing that screamed scandal. But beneath the calm, I could feel movement. Emails arriving at odd hours. Audit offices asking for quiet clarifications. People speaking in careful tones in the cafeteria. The system was shifting inch by inch, the way mountains move before anyone notices. I'd expected backlash. Instead, what came was gratitude. Anonymous messages from active officers, retired personnel, even a few civilians who'd served under my father's command decades ago. He taught me that duty without conscience is just obedience. You reminded us why we wear this uniform. It was humbling and heavy. Then one morning I found a small envelope on my desk. No return address, just my name written in clean, deliberate handwriting. Inside was a single line on white paper. "Tell the truth, but let it heal." No signature, no threat, no accusation. Just that. I recognized the phrasing, my father's way of saying goodbye. That afternoon I took a walk through the Hall of Honor again. The logbook sat open to the page with his signature beside Hayden's. I ran my hand over the leather, feeling the grooves of the pen beneath my fingertips. It didn't hurt to look at it anymore. It felt finished. But endings have a strange way of becoming beginnings. Later that week, the Inspector General's preliminary review landed on my desk. The cover letter was brief. Inquiry accepted. Further investigation pending. Findings to be shared with Congress Subcommittee on Defense Ethics. There it was, a crack of daylight through 30 years of stone. Still, I knew better than to celebrate. In the military, justice rarely moves quickly. It moves carefully and sometimes not at all. But care was enough. It meant no more silence. That weekend, I drove back to Wilmington. The marina looked smaller this time, maybe because the ghosts had left it. The boat, Honor Tide, was tied neatly to the dock, rocking gently in the afternoon sun. My father was sitting at the bow reading a newspaper with a mug of black coffee beside him. He looked up and smiled. "Didn't think you'd come back so soon." "I had to," I said. "The investigation's official now." He nodded, folding the paper. Then I guess the truth has its orders. I sat beside him. They won't name you publicly. You'll stay protected. Good, he said. That's enough. We watched the water for a while. A pair of dolphins surfaced in the distance, rising and disappearing like punctuation marks in a long, patient sentence. Dad, I said quietly. Hayden didn't make it. He didn't ask how I knew. He just nodded, once eyes steady on the horizon. He did what he was meant to do. We all did in the end. I told him about the ceremony, about the recruits, the applause, the mother who'd lost her son but still saluted, about the admiral who walked out without a word. Funny thing, he said. We spend our lives fighting enemies across oceans, but sometimes the real battle's just across the hallway. I smiled sadly. Maybe the ocean's easier. He laughed quiet and warm. You always were braver than me, you know. I hid. You stood up. I had your example, I said. He reached out and squeezed my hand. No. You had my mistakes. You just turned them into something better. The tide shifted, lapping against the hull. The sound was gentle, rhythmic, like breathing. We stayed like that for a while, 2 soldiers, 2 generations, 2 different wars fought in the same name. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything we hadn't said and everything we didn't need to. As the sun began to set, he said, I'm thinking of selling the boat. I turned to him. Why? Because it's time to stop running. He smiled faintly. Besides, I think it belongs in better hands. He handed me a small brass key. It was engraved with one word, honor. I didn't cry, not then. On the drive back north, the radio played an old Sinatra song my mother used to hum while cooking. I did it my way. I laughed quietly, then whispered, we sure did. Weeks passed. The audit reports came through, each one a stitch repairing a wound that had been open for decades. Names surfaced. Some retired quietly. Some faced inquiry. None could pretend ignorance anymore. At the next command briefing, my CO asked if I had any closing thoughts for the team. I looked around the table, young faces, some barely older than the age I was when my father vanished. Just one, I said. If you ever find yourself choosing between your orders and your conscience, remember this: the uniform doesn't define your honor. You do. The room was silent for a long time. Then someone nodded. Another followed. A few took notes. And that was enough. That night I uploaded the restored citation to the base's internal heritage archive. Under the comments section, I added one line. Truth doesn't expire, it waits for the right hands. When I left the office, the stars were bright over the harbor. I stood by the pier looking out toward the dark line of the horizon and thought about every person who had stood between right and wrong and chosen the harder road. My father, Hayden, maybe even myself. The sea was calm. Somewhere out there, a small boat moved through it, free and unafraid. I took a deep breath, pulled my coat tighter, and whispered to the wind. For every name they tried to erase, we remember. Then I turned, walked toward the lights of the base, and felt something I hadn't in years: peace. To those listening now, maybe you've carried your own silence. Maybe there's a truth you've kept folded away because you thought time would make it lighter. It doesn't. But sharing it even late can turn pain into purpose. If this story spoke to you, share it. Tell someone about the person who taught you what honor really means, because the more we speak it, the less it fades. And if you believe that truth and forgiveness still matter in this world, then stay with us. There are more stories to tell, more voices worth hearing, and more hearts ready to remember.